need to change it to 2. Was Mark wrong? That means that, I mean, I'm asking rhetorically. You don't have to ask. But if was Mark wrong, so was John and Luke. And Matthew's the only one that's right. So not only is it a contradiction, the deeper problem is that we can see Matthew at work. We can see his agenda. He is creating fiction, as was Mark and Luke, although Luke frames it as history. And the only way we can really see these things is if we dig and dig and dig and look at the original language and at what the skeptics and the scholars are saying about these particular things. Add them all up, draw your own conclusions. And I've drawn my conclusion, but I'm just trying to lay out just a fraction of the things I've seen in my, whatever it is, 10 years of studying outside of Christianity. So, are the Gospels reliable? In my opinion, not remotely reliable. Not even remotely reliable. And I've just touched on a couple of things. But now you wanted to say something that you felt would be a little bit lengthy, but I've taken quite a bit of time already. So you have complete control of the conversation, and I'm going to shut.
No, I thought a lot of what you said there is pretty interesting.
I'm just going to chill.
And I have taken a few notes to remember all, or not even all, but a lot of what you said there. I think that really matters. You were first talking about Mark and priority, the idea that Mark predates Matthew and Luke as well. But I actually disagree with that. There's a significant minority of scholars that hold Matthew to have been the first one that was written. My personal opinion is that Matthew wrote first, Luke copied some from Matthew, mostly the sayings of Jesus, and then Mark made a compilation of both Matthew and Luke together to form a simple meshed account. And then I think that John, of course, was not reliant at all on any of those Gospels. And now, you mentioned why Mark must date after 70 AD. I actually disagree with that dating. And you mentioned that Mark had knowledge of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD because he records Jesus prophesying the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But if that argument doesn't have any merit, then we should find that Mark would document the fulfillment of the destruction of Jerusalem, if indeed he wrote after the event had actually occurred. That is how he would seem to. It would seem to support Christianity. He was a Christian, and it would seem to support Christianity if he documented the fulfillment of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, but he did not document the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and therefore I think that just counts as evidence, the prophecy itself, that is, against the idea that Mark would date after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, you mentioned how the earliest attestations to the authorship of the Gospels is in the 2nd century. Oh, I'm sorry. You have your hand up?
Man, there's a lot of lag in here. Hey, one thing. And then you can tell me what you think about this. You say that you think if Mark was writing after 70 CE, he should write about the destruction of the temple. But that doesn't make any sense if his whole story ends at the death of Jesus, which would have been 30 to 33 AD. You see what I'm saying? His story is the ministry of Jesus up to his death, not about what happened 40 years later. And in fact, he does write about the destruction. It's a prophecy in the mouth of Jesus. So I'm not gonna push you hard on that. I'm just making an observation that it wouldn't make sense for him to include anything about, something that happened 40 years after his story actually ends. You see, his story only goes from the ministry of Jesus to his death and resurrection. So I don't think it doesn't make sense that he would actually come back at the end and go, and now let me talk about how the buildings were destroyed and the Romans coming in. That wouldn't be part of the Jesus story. It was just a thought that popped into my head. But
Yeah.
so I thought I'd do at least one interruption in this debate.
Yeah, I understand I
Go
understand
ahead.
your argument. I've actually heard it before. But usually what the gospel writers would do, I don't have an exact instance of this, but I am pretty certain that it occurs in the Gospels. If I'm wrong, you can point this out, and I'll just leave it there and grant that you're right. But after the quotation of the prophecy that Mark records of Jesus, he could put in a note that his prophecy has been fulfilled. And that's how he would do it. He wouldn't, make a note at the end. He would just put it right after the quotation of the prophecy itself. And so I don't know. I'm sure you don't agree that is plausible, but I guess we can just move on and talk about something else. Another one of your points that you were
I'm
mentioning. Yeah.
I'm typing an answer.
All right. Okay.
Typing. I'm typing why Mark would not have made a note like that. That wasn't how he wrote his gospel. Matthew did do that all through his gospel. Every time Matthew says this was done so that the prophecy would be fulfilled, that's how Matthew handled things, but that wasn't how Mark did. And so you're asking Mark to do something that he doesn't do all throughout his gospel. I totally understand your point, but I totally disagree with it. I think that, so that's all I'm saying is that he never does that, as far as I know. Well, maybe I shouldn't say never. I'd have to go check, but so anyway.
Okay, but
So
I think
all right. So what else?
I can argue.
You had some more stuff.
Okay, I have a. I'm sorry, there's a horrible lag on this thing right now. But anyway, I have an answer to what you're saying there. I think you're really assuming that Mark can't record a prophecy of Jesus without first knowing that the prophecy was fulfilled. I think you're basically assuming naturalism, assuming that such a thing cannot happen whatsoever. And therefore, I think that's just, an assumption on your worldview, which I'm sure I would commit, the same on my part. I would assume some things in my worldview are possible that you wouldn't. So I think that's where we would be at. I don't think we're going to get anywhere arguing about that particular point. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to move on to a few of the other things you said, especially about the contradictions that we find between the Gospels. Now, I've mentioned before, not particularly